It is my honor to introduce Captain Janell Routh. She is the co-deputy of the CDC's COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force Implementation Unit. She has an impressive background, having practiced pediatric HIV and general tropical medicine in Malawi with the Baylor International Pediatric AIDS Initiative, and worked in numerous roles across the CDC before transitioning to her current work in the Division of Viral Diseases. Dr. Routh, thank you so much for being with us today amidst what I'm sure is a very, very busy schedule with the vaccine rollout happening as we speak.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
So let's jump right in. Today, you're going to really talk to us about some of the vaccines that are out and on the market, and we're going to talk about some of the safety and efficacy. So I think one of the big questions that we're hearing, mRNA vaccines, it's a new technology. So can you tell us a bit more about how they work?
Sure, happy to. So you're absolutely right. They are new technology, but I want to emphasize that they're not unknown. These vaccines have been studied for more than a decade now. So the mRNA vaccines use a process that teaches our cells how to make a harmless piece of what we call the spike protein. And that spike protein is found on the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's the little knobs that stick out from the surface of the virus. These mRNA vaccines really take advantage of a process that our cells use to make proteins, and they harness this system to make that spike protein. After the protein piece is made, that mRNA instruction piece actually gets destroyed, so it doesn't stay in the cell. And then our immune system can actually make antibodies against that spike protein. Once those antibodies are made, they stay in our system, and when we're exposed to the virus, they can then bind to the spike protein and protect us against COVID-19 disease. Maybe I'll mention just a few key things about these vaccines. One, like all vaccines in the United States, they have been rigorously tested for safety before being authorized for use. Second, these mRNA vaccines do not contain a live virus, so they don't carry a risk of causing disease in the person that's been vaccinated. And finally, that mRNA instruction piece never enters the nucleus of our cells where our own DNA is found, so it does not affect or interact with that DNA. I know that's been a concern for some people, so want to emphasize that that RNA molecule really does get broken down quite quickly.
Yes, that's a great point. I'm really glad that you flagged that, because we've had a number of folks, as they were registering for this newscast, ask that very question. So thank you for sharing and breaking that down. That was really helpful. So could you tell us a bit more about the clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccines and elaborate, are they safe? Are they effective?
So Lily, I'll answer those first two questions right up front. They are safe and they are effective. So as many may know, 2 vaccines have now received an emergency use authorization, or an EUA, as I'll refer to it, after careful FDA review. The first is Pfizer, which is made by a company called BioNTech, which is a 2-dose regimen given at least 21 days apart. And the second is Moderna, which is another 2-dose regimen given at least 28 days apart. Both vaccines were tested in tens of thousands of adults. I think Pfizer had 45,000 adults enrolled in their trial, and Moderna had 30,000. These adults came from diverse backgrounds, so there were older adults and communities of color included in these clinical trials. Data from both clinical trials demonstrated that each vaccine was approximately 95% effective in preventing COVID-19 disease, and both had favorable safety profiles after the trials were complete. I think, both vaccines were really scrutinized for safety across the whole length of the trials, and really no concerning safety signals were noted for either one. The safety data, again, was reviewed by the FDA before they made that authorization, and it also gets reviewed by an organization called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is hosted by CDC and makes recommendations about vaccines for the general public. They also review that safety data and found it favorable to move forward with recommendations.
Thanks, Dr. Routh. And I'll add, as somebody who's worked in clinical trials for quite a long time, I have to say the scale of these clinical trials were massive. I mean, really did test a number of folks with the vaccine. And so I think that really does lend itself to this idea that it has been tested in a lot of folks. And that's something that we should think about as being really reassuring.
Yeah.
So we know that many members of our community have expressed concern surrounding the speed of the vaccines becoming available. And so could you talk to us a bit about how these vaccines were fast-tracked so quickly while still ensuring safety?
Yes, definitely have been hearing that comment, not just from folks in your community, but I think across the nation. There have been concerns about the safety of these vaccines because both the new technology that we talked about and also they had this appearance of coming onto the market quickly. But I would really like to reassure you that one of the reasons these vaccines were able to reach the market so quickly was that we were able to harness existing networks already in place to test these vaccines rather than starting from scratch, which often happens. We use these existing clinical trials networks that were already available and have been used to test other medical treatments and other vaccines to really quickly get these trials up and running. And I'll point out that another critical piece has been the investment in manufacturing, even before the efficacy data was published. The US government and vaccine manufacturers really did invest millions of dollars to scale up vaccine production while those clinical trials were still underway, greatly reducing then the amount of time between that vaccine authorization and our implementation. This is a really great financial risk to both the government and these companies. And this is why you don't see it done very often. But normally that investment in the scale up of manufacturing occurs only after you get the data suggesting that the vaccines are effective. But we did this at the same time because we knew the importance of getting these vaccines out. One other point is that these mRNA vaccines are also very faster and cheaper to produce than many of the vaccines we currently use because they're made of already sort of assembled pieces. They don't require something called cell culture, which we often have to use to make other vaccines, and that can take much more time. And maybe just one last point, I'll say that the FDA and CDC really did work incredibly hard to prioritize the review and approval of these vaccines, again, to get them out to the American public as soon as we could.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Routh. That is a great walkthrough and a number of really important examples as to why we were able to move so quickly on this. But again, while still absolutely ensuring safety. So thank you for that. And I think that this will be helpful for folks to both think about and to share. I encourage, share what you're learning from this newscast with others, because if you have the question, likely a lot of other people do. Another question, as we think about safety and longer term safety, what is the CDC doing to continue monitoring side effects and ensure vaccine recipient safety?
Yes, so the safety of these vaccines is really our top agency priority. And I can again say that these vaccines are being held to the same safety standards that we use for all of our routine vaccinations. We have existing systems that can help to really rapidly detect safety problems. And these systems have been scaled up for the COVID-19 vaccine introduction to really fully meet the needs. This is unprecedented, right? We've all heard that word, but we've never seen mass vaccination on this scale before. And we've also introduced additional systems and data sources that we've developed to really further enhance our ability to collect that data. So I'll mention two briefly. One is a system called vSafe. So this is a new smartphone-based after vaccination health checker for people who have received COVID-19 vaccines. It uses text messaging and web surveys to check in with vaccine recipients after vaccination on a set schedule for up to a year after they receive the vaccine. Participants can report side effects either through texting or these web surveys and any health problems that they've experienced after COVID-19 vaccination. And then if any are noted, vSafe has a mechanism that the recipient will receive a telephone follow-up call from CDC, and then we can take a report of any significant health impacts from the vaccine. I'll say that VSafe is voluntary. When you go for your vaccine, you should be offered to be enrolled in VSafe. And over 4 million people now have volunteered to participate in this program. So this is really going to create an enormous database to ensure that we continue to monitor the safety moving forward. We also have another system that's been in place for decades now, and that's called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS. And this is a national system that collects reports from healthcare professionals, vaccine manufacturers, and also the public of any adverse events that might occur after vaccination. Reports that appear to be unexpected, reports that we collect that seem to happen more sort of more often than we would expect, or reports that have unusual patterns all get investigated by a team here at CDC. And if we need to, we can implement special studies to take those investigations further. Lily, if I may, could I just interject a minute? I do want to point out that side effects are a reality of these 2 COVID vaccines. And I do want to make sure that we give everyone the facts, because once you have the facts, you know what to expect, and it doesn't come as such a surprise. Most people will not have any side effects from these vaccines, but some will. They're usually mild and they last maybe 1 or 2 days. So some people may experience pain or swelling at the injection site, maybe a small fever or chills, maybe a headache or back pain. These are generally worse after the 2nd dose, but again, are mild and they tend to go away after 1 to 2 days. And I do want to point out, I even told my parents this, it's a sign that your body is actually making those antibodies that we talked about earlier. So it's a sign that the vaccination is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you shared that, because I know sometimes people can be like, oh my gosh, what's happening to me? But that is what is supposed to happen. So it's right. Being prepared, having that knowledge ahead of time, I think is just so critical. I'll also share with you, so the audience knows, I actually had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Routh speak a few weeks ago on a webcast for the transplant community on the COVID-19 vaccine. And she told us about VSafe at that point. And I have been telling everybody about it. I've been saying, oh, you're getting the vaccine, you have to sign up. And actually, Anna Lagasse, an advocate who will be joining us this afternoon, she got the vaccine and she was all signed up for VSafe and said it's been a good experience and definitely instilling a lot of confidence, right? That we're still keeping an eye on it and we're collecting all of this data. So for those of you who are going out there to get the vaccine, please do sign up for VSafe, because it's up to all of us to contribute and so that we have this data pool. Okay, so now let's talk. We've talked about the vaccine and its makeup and how it works, but could you walk us through the distribution process? How does it work? And tell us a little bit more about how groups were prioritized.
Sure, happy to do that, Lily. So COVID-19 vaccines right now are being allocated on a pro rata basis, or sort of proportionally, by population out to the different states and territories. And we did this proportionality of distribution to ensure really a fair and equitable distribution across the whole of the United States. To dig a little bit deeper, so the distribution process really starts when a COVID-19 vaccine provider places an order into a system that is monitored right here at CDC. Those orders get sent out to the various vaccine providers, manufacturers, and they in turn then ship the vaccine. Pfizer actually ships directly to the vaccine provider, and Moderna goes through a centralized depot to ship the vaccine. So I guess that gives you a little sense of just that whole chain of how vaccine gets ordered, the orders get placed, and then the vaccine gets delivered to that provider who then administers it. I'll say that ACIP, as I mentioned earlier, that Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and CDC both have really endorsed guiding principles for the efficient distribution, as well as some jurisdictional flexibility, I'll say, for that COVID-19 vaccination program. So while the recommendations from ACIP came based on the principles of equity and disease severity in groups to select certain populations for early vaccine access. We've really given our states, our jurisdictions, the flexibility to administer this guidance in the best way that they see fit for their populations. So, we really do emphasize in the jurisdictions, it's not necessary to completely or fully administer vaccine to all eligible persons in one phase before they progress to the next phase. And certainly emphasize if there are extra doses that could expire, it's really acceptable to administer them to people who might be prioritized for a later phase. We don't want any vaccine doses to go to waste.
No, we definitely do not.
Yes. Demand and implementation challenges, I think, will vary also from one state to the next. So we know that jurisdictions are really going to move through these phases at different rates. It really depends on the state. I would say that most jurisdictions now really are moving into phase 1B vaccination, which prioritizes essential workers and older adults. But I would just say to the audience, please check with your state-specific website where you live to see where your state is in the rollout process, because it does vary from one to the next.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And will be, as part of our FAQs on our site, we will include a link where folks can go to find their state and then go ahead and look for what's happening and where can I go to book time to get vaccinated. So we'll be sure to have all of those resources right at your fingertips, available after our newscast. And so, Dr. Routh, you've really covered so much in such a short period of time. This has just been so informational. I want to give you an opportunity to just share any final thoughts that you might have.
Sure, Lily, happy to. I guess I would start by saying this is really an exciting and a historic time as we see these first vaccine doses being given out to combat the pandemic. I think right now we have over 41 million Americans who have received at least one dose and over 16 who have been fully vaccinated. So, just again, an unprecedented effort to get this vaccine out. I'd also say our work is far from over. So we are going to continue to see challenges in this pandemic. I think we've all been hearing about the new variants that have been identified in the UK and in South Africa and then have moved their way here. We're also hearing, oh my goodness, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. When you're rolling live, you never know what's going to happen.
All right. Well, as long as you can still see me.
It's energy saving, right? A little bit less light.
There we go. So yes, new variants. And then also I did want to make a mention of vaccine hesitancy, because I know these are challenges that we're working very hard here at CDC to combat. We're definitely having new vaccines on the horizon. So I think one great thing that we're going to be seeing this spring is a new vaccine that has less strict storage requirements. And it's a one-dose vaccine. So this is really going to allow us to expand our footprint to get vaccine out in an equitable manner to those who may have special access considerations, such as transient populations or rural communities. Yeah, and I'll just maybe close by saying that vaccination really is still one tool, albeit a very important tool, but it is one tool in our toolbox to controlling this pandemic. So even after vaccination, we definitely need to continue to think through the importance of masks, social distancing, and hand washing as we move forward this year. It's really only when we have more information about the longevity of this vaccine and its protection that we can start to ease back on some of those actions. So really wanting to focus us to not let our guard down and to continue to protect our friends and family through those other mechanisms. We know that community engagement is really vital to our implementation success. And so just as Lily said, I would really encourage you to continue to have conversations in your community to combat vaccination hesitancy and share the information you'll hear about today. Each one of you is truly a vaccine ambassador, and we're looking to you as partners for our success. So
Love
I
it.
think
We're all in this together.
we are.
We're going to be actually, later on in this webcast, we'll have Brooke Abbott, who is going to chat with us about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine equity. So we're going to keep expanding on that too. And thank you, Dr. Routh, for bringing that up. And also, yes, we need to continue being vigilant. We've hung in there for a long time. We've got to keep wearing the masks. We've got to keep hand washing. We're almost on the other side. Thanks to the great work of folks to get this vaccine up and running. And thank you, Dr. Routh, for all that you do in service to our country. We are so grateful.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me today. It was a real pleasure.